Did you know that more than 2.5 million people die every year in the U.S.? About 50% of those will be cared for by hospice. There is so much misunderstanding, though, about hospice care in our country, which is why a former hospice chaplain wrote a book to help families on their hospice journey. Here to share his book, A Companion for the Hospice Journey, we have author and retired minister Larry Patten. So good to see you, Larry. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for letting me be here. This is a delight.
And it is something that we don't talk about a lot. I think I heard recently that death is something that we all know is going to come for certain, but yet we just avoid it like the plague.
Absolutely. And it's also one of those things where not only do you not probably talk about it in a sense one-on-one, but who spends time advertising about hospice, you know, or talking openly about some of the options and some of the information. We just are very reluctant to talk about a subject that deals with dying and death and also grief.
Yes, and then when it comes, you just kind of feel at a loss because you haven't been preparing yourself. So let's break it down and explain to folks, what is hospice?
Hospice is, among other things, in a sense, it's a Medicare benefit, although even people who are not Medicare age, almost every insurance policy of some kind will have this kind of benefit, in which the recognition is that there are certain points that people arrive at with certain illnesses where a doctor will deem that they have 6 months or less to live. And that's where hospice care comes in. And one of the very key kind of differences with hospice care versus other medical care is, with hospice care, it's about comfort care. It is preparing a person and the family for those final days, weeks, months. And it's not something where it leads toward a cure. And that's, again, one of the reasons that people are not as comfortable talking about it. You'd rather talk about, oh, I'm going to get better.
Right.
With hospice, there is the reality that a couple of doctors, and sometimes more, but have indicated this is a point of your life where you need to be aware, and your family needs to be aware that the illness is such that there will be a limited amount of time to live. And that's a key thing I think we always struggle with also, because a lot of people, the image is, that's where I go to die. When I'm on hospice, I'm going to die. You and I are going to die. Everyone is going to die. Hospice, I think, challenges people at its best to realize this is still a time of living. Who do you need to talk to? What kinds of things would you like to have as part of your life?
So perhaps looking at it in a more positive way, not necessarily this is the end, even though it could be in 6 months or so, but just trying to live those months, those last few months.
Right. I mean, when I have served as hospice chaplain. Right now I'm working in grief support for hospice, but as a chaplain, one of the things that I did at a hospice was I went out and shared basic information about hospice. And often people would say, it's just where we go to die. And part of my response would be, if you give yourself enough time, because sometimes people wait until literally the last days, you know, to say, okay, I'm not going to do any more treatments, any more of this. But if someone can enter into hospice care, at least with certain illnesses, in enough time so that they actually can spend good time with family. They can have a chance to say to people some of their deepest feelings. They can have a chance to experience some things. One of the things that the hospice I work for now helps connect people up to the Dream Foundation. You know, so people have potentially have an opportunity. Let's do something as a family together. There's no guarantee that those things are going to happen, but with enough time you can set in motion some things that allow for there to be some real significant family time, personal time.
Larry, tell us about A Companion for the Hospice Journey. This is your book.
Yep. I have, by background, I've been in ministry. I've dealt with a lot of folks over the years in which they're dealing with dying, they're dealing with death, they're dealing with grief. I started having my first contact with hospice back in the late 1980s. And I really began to realize as I talked with folks and as I got more involved with what hospice represented, is we needed some simple tool, like a book, to give people the opportunity to understand some of the things. It's a serious subject. I try to sometimes be somewhat lighthearted with some of the things,
yes.
because I want people to read it.
Yeah.
One of the things that I really was very humbled by is I sought to get some people to read it who might recommend it. One of the folks who I sent it to, and I don't know her, I've never met her, but she's a hospice nurse by the way of Barbara Carnes. And she wrote one of the most essential hospice books that we still use. I mean, we've been using it for 25 plus years. It's something that is a description of what happens in the last days and weeks and months of a person's life. And she read my book in 2 days.
Whoa.
And sent me back a thing saying, I love this. So I have, you know, Barbara Carnes' recommendation. Some people have referred to her book as the Little Blue Book, because it's this real simple little thing. And so to get a recommendation from her,
That's
it's like,
huge.
it really was.
Well, Larry, unfortunately we're out of time, but we encourage everybody to pick up the book, A Companion for the Hospice Journey, whether you're on that journey now or in the future. It's very knowledgeable and very important stuff there. So thank you for sharing it with us. And you can find it on Amazon and your website, hospice-matters.com. All right, everybody, stay right there. We're back after this.